Okay, so we've pretty much worked our way now through all the different families of instruments, covering very, very broad groups and showing how they make their different sounds and the different techniques that people can use to play them. But most of the time, these instruments are not played on their own. Sometimes we listen to a soloist playing a piece, maybe a solo pianist or a solo cellist, but actually, in most cases, we hear music which is a combination of lots of these instruments together. And so over the next couple of videos, we're just going to talk through the different ways that we can put these various instruments together to form instrumental ensembles. Now these can obviously range from two guys playing some music together, a duet, right the way up to an enormous orchestra, and the orchestra might also have a choir that goes with it. There's a piece of music that the composer Gustav Mahler wrote, his 8th Symphony, which is called the Symphony of 1,000. It's called the Symphony of 1,000 because approximately 1,000 people are needed to put it on. And by the time we get to Gustav Mahler, towards the end of the 19th century, orchestras had become very, very large. We got to the point where basically there was no limits on the sizes of ensembles that composers could write for. And in addition to the orchestra, Mahler also writes parts for a choir, which can be any size that you want, and he sort of indicates that the larger the better, really, with this choir. There are some special names that we use to describe some of these instrumental groups, and they give us a bit of a clue as to how many players are involved. A duo, I think most people know, means two people. This could mean a piano duo, which involves two piano players playing together, either on the same piano or on two different pianos. Another very common form of duet is for two violins to play a piece together, or a violin and a viola, which offers the composer a slightly greater range of pitches that he can use. But perhaps most common is some form of melody instrument with a piano accompaniment. If you think about these instruments, what they're really brilliant at is providing a fantastic melody line. The violin can sing like a human voice like no other instrument can, and the flute can produce beautiful gliding melodies. Something they struggle with is producing harmony, because most of the time these instruments can only really play one note at once. And so it's very common for composers to write their melodies for a particular instrument, say a violin or a cello or a flute, and then provides a second part for a pianist to play. This is normally called the accompaniment, and there are some pianists who specialise in doing just this sort of playing. It actually requires some very different skills to being a piano soloist or playing with an orchestra as a pianist. You've got to listen really carefully to your soloist and make sure that you're never playing too loud so that we can't hear them, but at the same time you're balancing the melodies that they're playing with all the chords and harmonies that the composer intends. If we add a third player to the mixture here, we get what is called a trio. Some common combinations in trios could be a piano trio. Now this doesn't mean that we've got three piano players. What it generally means is one piano player and a couple of other melody instruments. So a common combination can be a piano, a violin and a cello, or a piano, a violin and a clarinet, or another wind instrument. Once we get up to four players, an ensemble called a quartet, composers really start to have some options. Take the string quartet, for example. With access to two violins, a viola and a cello, composers have the ability to write beautiful melodies but also rich harmonies for these string instruments, and so we don't really need a piano accompaniment anymore. The string quartet has proven a really popular ensemble for composers to write for. Beethoven in particular wrote some of the most fantastic music ever for string quartet. But also composers right the way through the 19th and 20th centuries really enjoyed writing for this kind of ensemble. Shostakovich, the Russian composer, who I really like a lot, also wrote a large number of string quartets, and it was for this ensemble that he seems to write some of his most personal music, the 8th Quartet being a really good example of that. Sometimes composers want to add to the four instruments of the string quartet, making it into a quintet. One very popular choice is to add a second cello, which adds opportunities for the cellos to play in harmony together. Other composers have chosen to add in a piano, which gives other opportunities and other textures that the ensemble is able to produce. There are also lots of examples of where composers have chosen to add a wind instrument along with the string quartet, Mozart's clarinet quintet being a really good example of this. Composers also often choose to write for wind and brass instruments in groups of 5. The woodwind quintet normally consists of a flute, an oboe, a clarinet, a bassoon, and a horn, and a brass quintet often has 2 trumpets, 1 French horn, a trombone, and a tuba. With this diverse group of instruments, composers are often able to produce a wide range of dynamics, harmonies, and textures. All of these groups that we've spoken about so far are what we would call chamber ensembles. That's because you can get them into a reasonably small room. Sometimes these groups get a little bit bigger, with a 7th, 8th, and 9th player being added. But once they get much larger than this, we start to talk of them as orchestras. And those will be the subject of the next video.